Good afternoon, everyone. I know as a teacher, one of the things I tell my staff is don't exhaust your listeners. The hecklers have started. And so I will do my best to be as brief as possible. 2 observations as I start. Could I ask that in printing the Union song, you change the second line of the chorus? Unionists are strong, not union. As the son of a strong Tobagonian woman and the younger brother of 4 strong Trinidad and Tobago women, I have a deep sensitivity for recognizing the contribution and the leadership of women. The second observation I want to make, and this is the academic in me, is to find just a little fault in the nuance of the theme. I'm good with all of it except the last word, the now. While now speaks of a sense of urgency, the problem with now, I find, is that it creates a kind of static mindset that we could develop something and we've done it. So when we think about now, I want us to be very clear. We're thinking about now in terms of urgency, not in terms of a destination and beyond. Thank you, Johnny. Yeah, that's my people. And on that note, permit me to give a personal and proud shout out to the Cipriani students in this union and in other unions in Antigua and Barbuda. It has been our pleasure and our honor to contribute to your development. Why is she making me blush? All people are not supposed to blush. Okay. It is a humbling experience for me to be given the honor of addressing the 57th General Conference of the Union. And I bring you greetings from the chairman and members of the Board of Governors of the Cipriani College of Labor and Cooperative Studies, and my hard-working colleagues and staff who stand in solidarity with you in the struggle for social justice. Interestingly, on Thursday of this week, we were reviewing the work we are mandated to do as a regional institution charged with building the capacity of the labor movement and fostering equity and fairness for workers. In that meeting, I raised with my colleagues my concerns about the existential threats that workers around the world, and certainly workers in the Caribbean, face. We talked about the changes in the world of work that demand that workers' representatives seriously rethink orientation, strategy, and tactics in order to remain relevant. We also talked about the way the system, the global system, is stacked against workers, and that the hard-won gains of the labor movement are being rolled back. We talk about how the world economic system, with its rules, are reinforcing inequity. We noted the change from wage-led to profit-led growth, which is manifested in the fact that most of the improvements in labor productivity now accrue to employers, and wages are lagging behind productivity. We also noted that even as wages lag behind productivity, employers are demanding that workers increase their productivity. Does that make sense? We were disheartened when we noticed that in the Caribbean, the history of the nationalist struggle has been forgotten. Politicians have forgotten that trade unionists were in the vanguard, sometimes at great personal sacrifice, in winning self-government and then with independence. But now, governments and parties that were spawned from the trade union movement are disavowing those links and are competing in a race to the bottom. My colleagues and I agreed that the trade unions in the region have a big job before them. But unfortunately, we concluded that they were coming up short. The threat is twofold. The economic and political system in the region is, as in most countries, hostile to workers. And unions, which are supposed to be in the vanguard, protecting workers, are not close to where they should be. One of my colleagues whose judgment I trust and who has been active in the movement at the level of his own union as well as nationally, regionally, and internationally, assured me that there were some bright spots in the regional labor movement. Sadly, he was not able to name 3 such bright spots. But you will be happy to know that the first one he mentioned was the Antigua and Barbuda Workers' Union. So I want to congratulate you and encourage you even as you approach your 60th anniversary. I wish I could be 60 all over again. I want to encourage you that you continue to be trailblazers and continue to set an example for the rest of the region. Now, I come to the task at hand. In Trinidad and Tobago, there used to be a mass, in Carnival, there used to be a mass called the Midnight Robber. I don't know if you have that here in Antigua. Let me tell you a little bit about the Midnight Robber, because I think it sets the context of what I want to share with you. The Midnight Robber basically was an individual character in the days when mass was street theater. And they were dressed as they were. And if 2 midnight robbers met, they would have a duel. But the duel was with words. And they will try to out-talk each other. Part of the out-talking was to say as many words as possible, and the longer the words, the better it was. Very often the words were invented. They had no meaning. But whoever could sound more, that is the one thing I want us to avoid, and I want to encourage you to avoid as the Antigua and Barbuda Workers' Union and the rest of the labor movement in Antigua and Barbuda looks at the issue of climate change. It's easy to say things. It's easy to say things that are meaningless and that are out of context. And one of the things I tell my colleagues at Cipriani is that text without context is a con. So, I have been asked to speak on the theme of climate change and to explore some of the implications for workers and their organizations. But let me put my approach into context. In my day job, as you've heard, I run a tertiary education institution. Most of our students are adults in their field. One of the things we try to do in adult education is not to tell people what the answer is. That is how you teach children. But it's also not to tell people even what the questions are. It is not even to tell people what to think about. For adults in leadership, or who aspire to leadership, you have to share with them the thinking environment and the thinking context based on the understanding of their situation and that environment. They have to decide what is their thinking challenge. They have to prioritize what are the issues that are important and that will result in the best outcome for themselves and their stakeholders. This is what is demanded of you as leaders in the labor movement. And let me hasten to say that each and every one of you, whatever your position is, even if you don't hold an office, is a leader in the trade union movement. That is one of the deeper meanings of solidarity, understanding your responsibility to take care of each other. So first I want to talk about the environment and the labor movement. Workers' organizations and you as leaders in the Caribbean are faced with. And I want to talk about climate change and the future of work and how you might want to approach that task. I have two questions for you. Where is cable and wireless? And the second one is, when is mango season in Antigua and Barbuda? You think so? Thank you. Many of you may be too young to remember C&W, when a job with C&W was like winning the lottery. Good salaries, good fringe benefits, nice pension, and a job for life. You may remember that less than 20 years ago, they basically owned West Indies cricket. I still have some old C&W t-shirts from those days. Let's talk about mangoes now. Good Trini. You remember that maybe up to 10 years ago, you knew when the height of mango season was? July and August, Joni. Now it seems that every year, mango season is earlier and earlier. I don't know if this is the effect of climate change, but when I was here 2 weeks ago with two of my colleagues, I remarked to them as we flew in how green Antigua was. And my mind goes back to maybe 30 years ago when you used to import water. All of this points to something. And it's somebody talked about the paradox of constant change. That's the wrong thinking about change. What we are looking at is dynamic change. So the first thing I want to draw your attention to is change. I know that you've heard many times that the only constant in life is change, but even change is changing. And there are two aspects of change I want to highlight. First is the speed of change, and nothing demonstrates this more than technology and climate change itself. Let us look at technology. This is possibly the single most important factor affecting the world of work now and in the future. We are not only seeing new technologies, but the pace of adoption of technology and its integration into day-to-day life is increasing. And I have some stats on the table, on the screen, but I just want to flag. For example, it took 75 years for the telephone to reach 100 million users. 16 years for mobile phones to reach 100 million users, and 2 months for ChatGPT to reach 100 million users. Change is rapid, but change is also non-linear. In the old days, and that's like 20 years ago, A followed B followed C. Now B and C are happening at the same time, and sometimes they are mixed with M, N, and O. In other words, you cannot expect to do X and then get Y, because there are so many other things happening simultaneously and impacting on the line that you thought you had. As a result, change is increasingly unpredictable and disruptive. And very important, David, Ken, leaders, you are faced with increasingly incomplete information. That is a critical thing for us to understand. And as leaders, you do not have the luxury of neat solutions. I want you to bear that in mind. You have change coming at you rapidly. It is not following a straight line. It is zigzagging. Sometimes it goes in a circle, and it is unpredictable, disruptive, and you never have all the information you need or the time to get all the information, even if it is available. The end result is that your operating context, and all I said before, and my wife will tell you I talk too much, but all I said before leads to this point. You are living in a complex world. In this complex environment, you really have two choices. You could pretend it doesn't exist and that things are like they were before, and you could go out to your mango tree in July and August and look for mangoes. Or you can recognize the complexity of the environment and decide to give it your best shot. And that is all that is required. Not certainty, but that you give it your best shot to interpret what you're dealing with. There is a group of rescue workers in the United States, and they operate in a national park that is quite beautiful, but also treacherous. Rescues are hardly ever the same. And in the park, circumstances and conditions can change rapidly. They have some rules, but the foundation of the rules is that they must be ready to face the changes. This group of rescuers have a credo or a philosophy that simply says, it is what it is before us, and we must deal with it. Important to understand here, if you identify the wrong it, you will be dealing with the wrong it, and you will not be accomplishing the result you want. So we need to make sure that we understand the environment, we understand what it is we are dealing with. In other words, your biggest challenge as labor leaders is how to make sense of everything that is happening and to chart a course that gets you to the core of your mission, which is not just to protect workers, but to ensure their prosperity. With this in mind, let's look at some of the specifics of climate change, and I will try not to repeat anything that was wisely said before. I confess that I am not a climate change expert, but its impacts are becoming increasingly obvious, and we have to deal with them. The climate change that is being observed now is mainly as a result, as you've heard, of the release of greenhouse gases as a result of our civilization's dependence on fossil fuels. Climate change, bottom line, is bad for the planet and bad for humans. Climate change caused by global warming and manifested in soaring temperatures, rising sea levels, worsening weather patterns, more frequent and intense storms. Small island developing countries are particularly vulnerable. Those three words used to describe countries like Antigua and Barbuda are each a descriptor of our challenges. We are small, so we have less physical space to absorb the impacts. We are islands, so we are tied to the sea for livelihoods. We are developing, so we have smaller fiscal space to make adjustments in the face of the impacts of climate change. As a union, our response to climate change must also be to consider some realities. Our scope for action is circumscribed by important factors. As you know, the biggest polluters are the big states. In order, China, the United States, India, the EU, Russia, Japan, Brazil, Indonesia. In the US, they continue to question even the science of climate change. So this is a situation not of our making, and there is very little we can do to change the outcome itself. And if we listen to the change in projection, we are nearing a tipping point, almost to the point of no return. What we have is a reality that we have to deal with, and we can go back to the Mount Rainier Credo. It is what it is before us, and we must deal with it. I like to deal with reality as much as possible. As a trade union in a small country, you have limited resources. I have a boss, and one day she warned me that I should not try to boil the ocean. In other words, we need to be very strategic in how we use our limited resources. The chairman of my board at the college has given me a simple but elegant philosophy. You can't serve from an empty cup. In other words, we have to, as we look at this big challenge, we have to identify for us what is the piece we are able to do. What is the point of entry that we can make an impact? And that is the hard work that you need to do. While I noted earlier, overall climate change caused by global warming is bad for humanity, we have to make the best out of a bad situation. Let us start by looking at climate change and jobs. In looking at jobs, I've tried to focus on the jobs that are most relevant. I'm almost there, don't worry. Are most relevant to Antigua and Barbuda. According to consensus, the jobs that will potentially be most negatively affected by climate change are tourism and hospitality, 50%, more than 50% of your GDP, especially in climate-sensitive areas such as coastal zones, agriculture and farming, agritourism, fishing and marine jobs, coastal and real estate development, insurance and reinsurance, and outdoor construction and infrastructure. The jobs that will potentially be most positively affected are in the sustainable agriculture and food security, ecotourism, renewable energy, public health and climate-related healthcare, energy efficiency, disaster response and emergency management, climate science, water management, climate resilience, and climate adaptation. But it is not only an issue of jobs, but also of decent work and protection of workers' rights. For example, as temperatures rise, we have to make sure that workers engaged in outdoor work are guaranteed OSH protections. As new types of jobs emerge, many of them will be in the form of non-standard employment, including gig work, contract work, part-time work, and remote work. We have to make sure that they have access to both appropriate representation and protections. I want to suggest that climate change, with new jobs and new work organizations it will bring, might actually be an opportunity for us in the Caribbean to start the process of resetting our labor market. The Caribbean has one of the highest rates of youth unemployment in the world. The youth unemployment rate is usually more than double the unemployment rate in the labor market as a whole. One of the problems of our labor market is the mismatch between the skills needed and the skills required, and the skills supplied. Our education and training systems are out of alignment with the needs of the marketplace. So this might be just the opportunity for a rethink of the way our education system works, and we could take a more demand-driven approach to training and development, as is done in many countries such as Ireland and Singapore to great success. As a union, we have to be thinking about how we are going to organize and mobilize both to protect workers and to maintain our relevance. Happily, the international workers' movement has been paying attention. The Just Transitions Framework is something that unions interested in mitigating the negative effects of climate change should become familiar with. The framework, which was developed by the trade union movement, encompasses a range of social interventions needed to secure workers' rights and livelihoods when economies are shifting to sustainable production. The Just Transitions Framework is an integrated approach that speaks to the complexity that I referred to earlier. It demonstrates that as trade union leaders, you must think about many things simultaneously if you are going to be effective. For practical purposes, my work always boils down to two issues: effectiveness and efficiency. And you would notice I always put effectiveness first. Effectiveness is simply doing the right things, while efficiency is doing things right. Too often, we jump to do things, and we do them efficiently, but they're not always the right things to be doing. I will give you an example that is relevant to climate change. The world is transitioning to electric vehicles. I think you would all agree that the right thing will be to train repair technicians, and you notice I don't say auto mechanics, who will be familiar with EVs. That will be the right thing to do. But we could continue to train to turn out the best mechanics who can only fix internal combustion engines. I want to close by giving you a menu of things that you may wish to consider. In providing this menu, I do it as someone with a knowledge of the Caribbean as a whole and some information about Antigua and Barbuda, but not the details that come from the lived experiences that you would have as citizens here. So the menu is not the final word. It's offered as a means to trigger your own thinking consistent with the framework that I have outlined during my address. You can look at it and determine that there are things that make no sense in your context, and there are things that have to be left out and are important. I suggest that the union builds a coalition of like-minded entities in Antigua and Barbuda to develop approaches to address climate change. And I urge you, don't wait on the government. I don't know anything about your government, but I know governments. These coalitions need to look at what are the legislative and policy initiatives that need to be considered. These coalitions should be designed to give voice and amplify the voice of the trade union movement. They should include other workers' organizations, civil society, and academia. The union can exercise a leadership role that will transcend narrow interests and focus on the needs of the country as a whole. You need also to be considering what is the information that is necessary to make evidence-based decisions to address climate change and your work program in addressing climate change. The union, in partnership, should develop a program of research to gather data, information, and knowledge that could be used as evidence in articulating its positions. The union should also look within and ask itself, how is it structured to realize these objectives? What are the internal systems, policies, processes, procedures, communication mechanisms, and are they adequate? Do we provide sufficient opportunities for internal dialogue, including questioning what we are doing? I extend to you the hand of solidarity of my institution if you believe that we can support you in any way. Thank you very much.